Who's the real power in King's Landing?
Tywin Lannister.
7 kingdoms united in fear of Tywin Lannister.
I didn't trust your father, but I respected him. He was no fool. He understood that sometimes we must work with our rivals rather than destroy them.
You know what legacy means? It's what you pass down to your children.
I need you to become the man you were always meant to be. Father's orders.
Well, we mustn't disappoint Father.
It's what remains of you when you're gone.
My father was the hand of the king for 20 years.
You really think a crown gives you power? But what makes a good king? Your brother was not a wise king. Your brother was not a good king.
I am the king!
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king. If he had been, perhaps he'd still be alive. They hurt my son! My children. You disgraced the Lannister name for far too long.
Tywin Lannister commanded the screen with a terrifying gravitational pull. He was the ultimate architect of power, a man so brilliantly written and flawlessly executed that, truthfully, it feels like a tragedy he didn't survive until the very end of the series. The show lost its most compelling political mastermind far earlier than expected. But Tywin's early, undignified death wasn't just done for shock value. It was the masterfully inevitable conclusion to a life built on a massive, golden lie. Throughout his life, Tywin projected an aura of absolute authority and ruthless pragmatism. He justified every atrocity, every betrayal, and every cold-blooded murder by claiming it was all done for one noble purpose: his family. But underneath that terrifying facade lies a deeply hypocritical man. Tywin Lannister didn't actually love his children. He loved the idea of his legacy. He completely separated the idea of family from personal affection, defining it instead as a historical and political institution. By viewing his children not as human beings, but as disposable tools for dynastic advancement, his unrelenting cruelty alienated them and bred the exact resentment that ultimately destroyed him. To understand the tragic irony of how the smartest man in Westeros engineered his own downfall, we have to look at how he built his myth in the first place. In his very first appearance, Tywin Lannister is shown meticulously skinning a dead stag while conversing with his son, Jaime. This visceral action symbolically prefigures his dominance over the ruling House Baratheon, but more importantly, it establishes his cold, hands-on ruthlessness. Covered in blood, Tywin strips away the romanticism of knighthood and delivers his core thesis to his golden boy.
Your mother's dead. Before long I'll be dead. And you. And your brother. And your sister. And all of her children. All of us dead. All of us rotting in the ground. It's the family name that lives on. It's all that lives on. Not your personal glory, not your honor, but family.
Tywin operates under the belief that he is building something immortal. He openly declares that the actions taken in the present could establish a Lannister dynasty that will last 1,000 years. But this grand vision requires a chilling sacrifice. By prioritizing his abstract legacy and political reputation over individual human life, Tywin effectively dehumanizes his own children. To understand why the most powerful man in Westeros governs his realm, and his own blood, with such ruthless detachment, we have to look back at the trauma that forged him. For Tywin Lannister, the concepts of family, duty, and honor are stripped of their traditional emotional or moral meanings and weaponized as tools for absolute control. Because he defines family solely as a historical institution, he views his children not as human beings deserving of love, but as tools or chess pieces explicitly designed to further the Lannister legacy. He enforces this through a terrifying psychological framework. He uses familial love and acceptance as a transactional currency to buy his children's compliance or punish their defiance. We see this transactional cruelty most clearly in his treatment of his only daughter.
You're still fertile, you need to marry again and breed.
I am Queen Regent, not some brood mare.
You're my daughter!
You will do as I command, and you will marry Loras Tyrell.
Tywin utilizes Cersei primarily as a diplomatic asset and breeding tool, valuing her existence almost entirely for her ability to secure powerful political alliances through marriage. Throughout her life, Tywin repeatedly reduces Cersei to a marital commodity. He first attempted to wed her to Prince Rhaegar Targaryen to bind House Lannister to the royal dynasty. When that failed, he orchestrated her loveless marriage to King Robert Baratheon to intertwine the crown's interests with Lannister wealth. Tywin views Cersei through a lens of fundamental misogyny and patriarchal control, refusing to train her in the mechanics of governance. Years later, when she is a widow and queen regent, he commands her to marry Sir Loras Tyrell to secure the wealth and military might of the Reach. When Cersei passionately protests that she is not some broodmare, Tywin explicitly shuts down her agency. He even threatens to drag her kicking and screaming to the Sept of Baelor to force the marriage if necessary. To Tywin, Cersei's intellect and autonomy are irrelevant. He tells her plainly to her face,
I don't distrust you because you're a woman. I distrust you because you're not as smart as you think you are.
By consistently stripping her of her autonomy and silencing her desires, Tywin ensures his daughter is treated as nothing more than a highly valuable pawn. If Cersei is his political pawn, Jaime is his golden vessel. Tywin's relationship with his eldest son is defined entirely by his overarching obsession with his family's legacy. He sees Jaime strictly as the perfect face of the new Lannister dynasty and a vessel to carry on the family name. When King Aerys II appointed a 15-year-old Jaime to the Kingsguard, Tywin was furious, not out of fatherly concern for his son's safety, but because the lifelong celibate vows robbed Tywin of his prized heir and jeopardized the future of Casterly Rock. Whenever Jaime tries to assert his own identity, such as his desire for the simple, martial life of a knight rather than politics, Tywin refuses to accept it. When a traumatized Jaime returns to King's Landing without his sword hand, Tywin demands he leave the Kingsguard to rule Casterly Rock. When Jaime refuses, citing his bloody honor, Tywin scoffs at his sacred oaths as a childish inconvenience. He instantly and coldly disowns him, delivering a chilling dismissal to strip Jaime of his identity.
A one-handed man with no family needs all the help he can get.
But Tywin's absolute mastery of manipulation is revealed during Tyrion's trial for King Joffrey's murder. Jaime, desperate to save his brother, offers to leave the Kingsguard, take his place as heir, and father children named Lannister in exchange for Tyrion's life. Tywin instantly replies,
Done.
This unhesitating acceptance reveals a horrifying truth. Tywin had orchestrated this exact scenario to extort Jaime into submission. He was entirely willing to sacrifice one son to force the obedience of the other, proving he views Jaime purely as a breeding tool to manufacture heirs. By treating Jaime as a crucial chess piece rather than a person, Tywin ensures their relationship remains entirely transactional. Tywin justifies all of this by twisting the concept of duty to gaslight his children into subjugating their own autonomy. He defines any personal desire his children have as a selfish betrayal of the Lannister name. This gaslighting reaches its darkest depths with Tyrion. When Tyrion asks when Tywin ever sacrificed his own interests for the benefit of the family, Tywin responds that on the day Tyrion was born, he wanted to carry him into the sea, but instead let him live and brought him up as a Lannister. By framing the mere act of not murdering his infant son as a monumental sacrifice, Tywin gaslights Tyrion into feeling permanently indebted to him. He weaponizes the lack of love, ensuring his children spend their lives desperate for an approval he will only grant if they surrender their free will. If Tywin Lannister's family is his legacy, the Seven Kingdoms are his chessboard. And his political philosophy for controlling that board is a direct, textbook manifestation of the core tenets found in Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. To Tywin, his father Tytos perfectly illustrated Machiavelli's warning. A prince who strives after goodness in all his acts will inevitably come to ruin. Tytos's desire for affection led to open rebellion and the mockery of his house. Tywin internalized this failure, adopting Machiavelli's famous conclusion that it is much safer to be feared than loved. Men are inherently ungrateful and fickle, but fear is hardened by the sureness of punishment. Consequently, Tywin built his worldview on the belief that power does not derive from love, which can be easily manipulated, but from fear, which is stable and absolute. But Tywin's true mastery lies in how he applies violence. He is not a sadist like Joffrey Baratheon or Ramsay Bolton, who inflict pain for personal pleasure. For Tywin, violence is a cold, calculated instrument. Machiavelli advises that if a ruler must use cruelty, it is well used when applied suddenly, comprehensively, and decisively. Tywin's entire career is defined by this doctrine. When he drowned the Reynes and Tarbecks at Castamere, it was a move engineered to ensure that no vassal would ever dare laugh at a Lannister again. Years later, during the sack of King's Landing, Tywin ordered the brutal murders of Rhaegar Targaryen's infant children. To Tywin, the lives of these children were simply a necessary price to pay to definitively sever ties with the Targaryen dynasty and secure the new Baratheon regime. He viewed the moral outrage of men like Eddard Stark as a fundamental failure to understand the true nature of power. This cold calculus reaches its absolute zenith during the War of the Five Kings. Facing a military prodigy in Robb Stark, Tywin realized he had been outmaneuvered on the battlefield. So he chose to win the war with paper and ink. He used his fearsome reputation and political leverage to subvert Walder Frey and Roose Bolton, eliminating his most dangerous enemy with virtually no risk to his own forces. When his son Tyrion questions the horrifying dishonor of the Red Wedding, Tywin defends it with pure, unsentimental pragmatism.
Explain to me why it is more noble to kill 10,000 men in battle than a dozen at dinner.
This specific argument perfectly aligns with the rational actor model of political science, which assumes leaders make decisions through a strict calculation of costs and benefits. By applying a mathematical calculus to warfare, Tywin argues that minimizing the overall death toll maximizes utility, making the slaughter at the twins the superior, even more moral choice. However, this utilitarian logic is ultimately a rhetorical shield. It masks the fact that his primary motive is not the humanitarian goal of minimizing bloodshed, but asserting the absolute dominance of House Lannister. By reducing human lives to a mere arithmetic comparison of body counts, Tywin attempts to sanitize a horrific atrocity. His cost-benefit analysis works in a vacuum, but it entirely ignores the long-term societal damage of his methods. Unlike a traditional battlefield victory, the Red Wedding destroys the very concept of diplomacy and trust in one night. By weaponizing the peacemaking process and violating the sacred guest right, Tywin ensures that surviving enemies will never truly trust the Lannisters to honor future agreements. He traded the long-term stability of the realm for a terrifying, short-term paradigm where the Lannisters win at any cost. Tywin Lannister's public persona is a fortress, built on an absolute adherence to family honor and a fierce rejection of the shameful behavior exhibited by his father. Titus Lannister had allowed a low-born mistress to make a mockery of House Lannister, an embarrassment Tywin aggressively overcorrected for. To prove his absolute authority, Tywin brutally punished his father's mistress by parading her naked through the streets, and he spent decades constantly chiding his son Tyrion for his open association with sex workers. But this pristine, austere image is entirely fabricated. The fortress is built on sand, and the illusion is permanently shattered when Tyrion discovers Shae, his own former mistress, in Tywin's bed just before Tywin's death. This single revelation exposes that Tywin shares the exact same lustful weakness for sex workers as his father and his son. It reveals that his disgust for sex workers is not rooted in actual moral purity, but rather in a desperate, obsessive need to maintain public perception. To maintain a commanding, almost superhuman aura, Tywin publicly repressed his desires while fulfilling them in secret. This desperation is perfectly captured in the rumor that during his time as Hand of the King, Tywin constructed a secret tunnel from the Red Keep directly to Chataya's brothel, so his reputation would not be compromised. He operates under the delusional belief that as long as his vices are kept strictly out of the public eye, they do not jeopardize his legacy. Furthermore, the specific act of sleeping with Shae reveals that for Tywin, power, domination, and sex are heavily intertwined. Sleeping with his despised son's paramour in the Tower of the Hand allows him to physically dominate and humiliate the very people he publicly scorns, asserting ultimate dominance over Tyrion. He is able to justify this immense hypocrisy because he fundamentally dehumanizes sex workers. He does not view them as human beings, but simply as tools that he can use and casually dispose of. This intense hypocrisy fuels the most destructive and fascinating dynamic in the entire narrative, his relationship with Tyrion. Tywin's deep-seated hatred for his youngest son is a textbook manifestation of psychological projection, a defense mechanism where an individual unconsciousness attributes their own disowned, highly negative traits onto someone else. Tyrion's dwarfism inherently invites the public mockery that Tywin so desperately fears, and Tyrion openly indulges in the very desires that Tywin works so hard to conceal. Consequently, Tywin sees in Tyrion a walking, breathing reminder of everything he hates about his own family and himself. Tywin violently punishes his son for the exact crimes he privately commits. The ultimate tragedy of the Lannister dynasty is that despite his physical differences, Tyrion is Tywin's true intellectual successor. Throughout the narrative, Tyrion repeatedly mirrors Tywin's effectiveness. He demonstrates brilliant political administration as acting Hand of the King, a strategic military mind during the Battle of the Blackwater, and shares his father's capacity for calculated ruthlessness. Yet, Tywin's immense pride and his unresolved resentment over his wife's death create an absolute psychological block. He vehemently refuses to acknowledge that the son he views as a grotesque monster is actually the only child equipped to carry on his legacy. Finding Shae in his bed proves that underneath his calculated, pragmatic facade, Tywin Lannister is ruled by the same petty, base human desires that he so viciously condemned in others. And his refusal to accept this truth is what finally puts a loaded crossbow in his son's hands. Tywin Lannister's demise is a masterclass in tragic irony, meticulously designed by George R.R. Martin to dismantle the pristine, fearsome legacy the Lannister patriarch spent his entire life building. Every single component of his death, the location, the weapon, and his final words, serves to expose the fundamental hypocrisy and failure of his worldview. We must first look at the undignified location. Tywin was obsessed with projecting an aura of absolute authority, dignity, and fear, desperate to distance himself from the public embarrassment of his weak, mocked father. Yet, he meets his end in the most vulnerable and humiliating place possible, sitting on the privy with his bedrobe hiked around his hips. By dying in the middle of a base biological function, the myth of Tywin's superhuman grandeur is literally and metaphorically stripped away. When the crossbow bolt strikes him and his bowels loosen in death, it provides the ultimate punchline to his life, cementing the realization that Lord Tywin Lannister did not, in the end, shit gold. This visceral reality shatters his golden facade, proving he was just a mortal man, full of the same human frailties and filth that he ruthlessly condemned in others. Then there is the weapon itself. To execute his father, Tyrion arms himself with a crossbow belonging to the late King Joffrey. This choice carries profound symbolic weight. Joffrey was the horrific product of Cersei and Jaime's incest, a massive blind spot Tywin willfully ignored because acknowledging it would threaten his idealized vision of his family's legacy. Using Joffrey's weapon to kill the Lannister patriarch symbolizes how the toxic, dysfunctional family dynamic Tywin cultivated ultimately turned back to destroy him. Furthermore, it is a mechanical weapon that allows a physically weaker individual to overcome a powerful, imposing warlord from a distance, proving that Tywin's reliance on traditional martial intimidation could not protect him from an intelligent, aggrieved adversary. But it is the final dialogue that truly cements his tragedy. Even with a loaded crossbow pointed at his chest, Tywin's immense arrogance prevents him from recognizing his loss of control. He repeatedly attempts to command Tyrion and dismisses Shae, the woman he had just hypocritically slept with, as a whore. This willful blindness culminates in his definitive, dying rejection.
You're no son of mine.
I am your son.
Tyrion's chilling response exposes Tywin's greatest psychological failure. Tywin's fatal flaw was his prideful refusal to see that the son he dehumanized and hated for his dwarfism was his true intellectual and pragmatic successor. In a darkly poetic twist, Tyrion applies Tywin's own signature political doctrine, the complete, ruthless eradication of one's oppressors, just like the reigns of Castamere, against Tywin himself. Ultimately, Tywin's death signifies more than just the end of a ruthless patriarch. It is the definitive, total collapse of his entire socio-political philosophy. He spent his life operating under the delusion that ruling through absolute fear, abandoning moral constraints, and treating his children merely as disposable tools would secure a 1,000-year legacy. He believed that as long as the family name commanded terror, the internal rot didn't matter. But power, rooted exclusively in fear and transactional extortion, is incredibly brittle. Tywin was a master tactician, but a fundamentally failed architect. He built a magnificent golden machine that could only be operated by him, and the moment he was removed from the controls, the gears immediately began to tear each other apart. Instead of forging an unbreakable dynasty, his unrelenting cruelty and complete lack of parental love systematically alienated the only people capable of sustaining his work. By stripping his children of their autonomy and humanity, he bred the exact psychological resentment that drove his youngest, most capable son to patricide. Tywin's obsessive prioritization of the abstract Lannister legacy over the actual human beings in his family ensured that the very legacy he died for would begin to crumble the exact moment he took his last breath. Look at what his 1,000-year dynasty looks like the day after his death. He left behind a daughter consumed by paranoia whom he had actively refused to train in governance, viewing her only as a brooding mare. He left behind an eldest son who had become entirely disillusioned with the family name, fundamentally rejecting the role Tywin forced upon him. And he left behind a brilliant youngest son who fled across the world after putting a crossbow bolt through his chest. Tywin Lannister successfully won the War of the Five Kings, but his methods guaranteed the extinction of House Lannister in the process. For all his unmatched brilliance, Tywin fundamentally misunderstood human nature. He forgot that a house built on terror, hypocritical gaslighting, and the emotional starvation of its own children cannot stand. He thought he was the ultimate pragmatic realist, but his belief that he could control the human heart with paper, ink, and gold was the greatest fantasy in Westeros. In the end, the most terrifying man in the Seven Kingdoms was just a hypocrite bleeding out on a privy, leaving behind nothing but a legacy of ash and a song about rain weeping over empty, ruined halls.